Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Gao. I'm the Vice President of Business and International Development at Family Source Consultants. And today we have Ruth joining us from San Diego Fertility Center. Ruth, welcome. Say hi to our viewers, please.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here today. Happy to join you.
Yeah, so first, welcome you all to our webinar today. And today, with Ruth from San Diego Fertility Center, we'll be talking about how to choose a fertility clinic and a surrogacy agency, because we hear from intended parents all the time that there are hundreds of fertility clinics and hundreds of surrogacy agencies, and it's just overwhelming. How do you choose one that fits your needs and that's a good option for you? Today we'll be talking about that. And first, Ruth, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience, please?
Yeah, sure. So, my name's Ruth Ellis. I am Director for U.S. Development for San Diego Fertility Center. But contrary to what the name implies, I'm actually on the East Coast. I manage our New York East Coast presence, but I also support incoming domestic third-party patients, meaning egg donor and/or surrogacy patients from across the U.S. And then we've got different teams that do the other countries that we have a presence in, but those are not for me. I'm just U.S. third-party patients.
Awesome. Welcome. Thank you so much. And do you mind sharing a little bit how you got into the third party reproduction field, and, like, what is the most rewarding part of your job?
Yeah, definitely. So I came to this on a rather unusual route.
Mhm.
I had grown up really involved in the gay community and the LGBT sort of arena.
Mhm.
Back in the sort of early 2000s, I was an ambassador for the Trevor Project and on boards for Human Rights Campaign and all these things. And then I worked in politics for a few years, actually worked
Mhm.
for Obama from '07 through '09. And
Amazing.
while I was doing that, I met
Mhm.
someone who owned a surrogacy agency that was an attorney. And we got to talking, and I thought what she did was just so amazing. And
Mhm. Mhm.
the conversation kind of continued on and off throughout a few years, and I did some work for her. And after the inauguration in 2009, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, um,
Mhm.
and ended up being at an event with this now friend that I had met, and she asked me if I would want to do some business development for her. And it started out very part time, and now here
Mhm.
I am. What? Oh my gosh, 15 years later, almost. And I worked at her agency law firm for about 8 years in between that
Mhm.
time and now. And then I
Mhm.
asked to come work at SDFC. They were just my favorite clinic to work with. And I
Brilliant.
created this role for myself. And
Mhm.
I strive to be there for people throughout the entire process, which I think makes my role a little different. But yeah, that's kind of where I was then and where I am now.
Got it. I love it. I love it. I love how involved you have been in different fields of the third party reproduction, and also just family building overall. And one thing I really do like about San Diego Fertility Center is that you guys really do spend a lot of time helping intended parents understand the process and the cost, and answer their questions before they even have their initial consultation, right?
Yes, so that's one thing that I really wanted to make a part of this role is to say,
Mhm.
let me talk to you before you talk to a doctor so that when you get there, you're not wondering, oh, do you guys have surrogates? How do we
Mhm.
find a surrogacy
Mhm.
agency? How much
Right.
does this cost? I will walk you through all the logistics and the costs and the timelines so that when you do your doctor consult, the doctor's free to just talk about the medical part of this. And then I
Yep.
tell you that if you start with me, you get me all the way through. If you need me or want me, you get my cell phone number. You can text me
Right.
questions as they come into your brain instead of trying
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
leave the message at the clinic. I've
Right.
got people texting me off and on all day with just really short questions that can get a short,
Mhm.
sweet answer and keep them from getting
Mhm.
frustrated.
Mhm.
I love, getting, you asked about rewarding. I love getting the sonogram pictures and the pregnancy.
That's fantastic. Okay, well, let's cut into the things that a lot of intended parents have asked about. We have collected a list of questions we have received from a lot of intended parents about how to choose a clinic, how to choose an agency. So generally speaking, when someone is choosing a fertility clinic, there are some common factors they all consider, usually success rates and the cost and the service offered at the fertility center, and the doctor or team size and their experience. And can you elaborate a little and share from your perspective, what do you think are the most important things for intended parents to consider when they're looking for a clinic to work with?
Sure. Yeah. I think, number one has always, you've got to start with success rate. You've just got to kind of start there and then branch out. Because if one clinic is looking like they're at 70% and another one's at 20% and you didn't know that, you really, really, really want to be with the one that's at 70%. And I think that the other thing to know about success rate is that when you go and you look on these sites like SART or CDC, which are sort of the clearinghouses for information about success rates and cycles, the thing to know about those sites is that, especially I think for the larger clinics that have been doing this for a long time, the results are a little bit misleading for everyone, not for any particular clinic, but they're misleading for everyone. A, because you graduate from your IVF center at the end of the first trimester. We are not a doctor when you deliver your baby. So we have to track that data down, turn it into SART. It's usually a couple years old before it ever shows up on SART, and then the current is not going up for another couple years. We're trying to deliver this data. The other thing is there's a lot of frozen embryos that have yet to be transferred, and that can skew the results in a success rate if you don't know exactly how to filter on these sites.
Got it.
Yeah, the better advice I can give everyone is when you interview clinics, ask them what their ongoing established pregnancy rate is, which means at the time they graduate from the clinic at the end of the first trimester. Every clinic knows that in real time. Every clinic is tracking that. And at SDFC, that's about, if you have one transfer, you've got about an 80% chance of graduating with an established pregnancy at the end of the first trimester. If you made it to a third transfer, you'd be a little over 90% of having an established pregnancy that graduates at the end of the first trimester. And at the end of the first trimester, things can happen later in a pregnancy, but it is much more rare than in the first trimester. So that's a really good statistic that you can ask every clinic about, and then you can compare the real-time data, and the data actually makes more sense. And you want to make sure it's for your case. If you're a mom using her own eggs and you're 36, you want to know what it looks like for someone like you, not for an egg donor. That's
exactly. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that insight. And I'm sure it will be very helpful for, for the intended parents who are looking into this kind of information.
Yeah. I think the other things secondary to success rates are going to be things like cost, what's included in the clinic fees, and how long a clinic's been doing surrogacy and how much they do. Because even here in New York, surrogacy was only legalized 3 years ago. Some of the best IVF centers in the world are here, for sure, but they've only been doing surrogacy for 3 years. So logistically, that institutional knowledge may not be there the way it is with some of these clinics like San Diego Fertility Center, who've been doing this for 30 years and 700 surrogate cycles a year. So there's a big difference in experience. And then you can ask, what technology they use, although some of that's going to sound great, but make sure it's the latest, greatest. They have backups to backups, all of those kind of things. And in the end, when you know you're comparing apples to apples, then you can go with your gut. Who do I feel the safest with? If something doesn't go as planned, who do I want to be there supporting me?
Got it. Awesome. Yeah, thank you. And I am happy to address a little bit about how to choose a surrogacy agency. And generally, there's so many surrogacy agencies out there as well. Some are bigger, some are smaller, and the costs are kind of all over the place as well. And when intended parents ask me how to choose a surrogacy agency, I always encourage them to do their research and try to talk to some intended parents who worked with this agency and went through this experience, went through this process with them, and talk to those intended parents and ask about their experience and see what the challenges were for them and what they really liked about each agency. And also obviously look at the agency's experience. And some agencies may have just started a couple of years ago. And I'm not saying they're not qualified to to help intended parents and stuff like that. But sometimes when difficult things happen during the journey, when hiccups happen, you do need an experienced team there to help you, to hold your hand through this process and always help you find a solution to push things forward. And also, I think another really important factor when parents are talking to surrogacy agencies, I always encourage intended parents to think about what information you're given, the answers you're given. If an agency is only telling you what you want to hear, that is a red flag. Because you want to work with an agency that's honest and that's giving you their honest opinion. And sometimes it may not be exactly what you want to hear, but it's still important to choose an agency that's honest with you, rather than just like, telling you things you want to hear from the get-go, and then later on when things happen, you'd be like, well, this is not what I'm expecting. That's just my 2 cents about choosing a surrogacy agency. And then next, how we have international intended parents and domestic intended parents. And I think, sometimes people tend to choose to work with a clinic that's close to them just because it's convenient and stuff. But is it necessary for intended parents to choose a clinic near where they live? Like, what are the pros and cons if they don't work with a clinic that's super close to them?
Yeah, so obviously there's going to be some conveniences if you work with a
Mhm.
clinic that's super close to where you live. I mean, that just kind of goes
Mhm.
without saying. But
Right.
whether or not it's necessary, it's absolutely not necessary, especially
Mhm.
considering that I think 30% of our patients are international. So none of them
Mhm.
are going to a clinic near where they live. Um,
Yeah.
and in the US, it's really, again, success rate first, make sure everything's equal. And then I think
Exactly.
that the gut feeling that this is the right clinic for me is much more important than whether the clinic is close
Mhm.
to you. And I feel that way for surrogacy agencies as well, for different
Mhm.
reasons. Uh,
Mhm.
you know, as a parent, if you're a man, you only need to go to the clinic one time. And
Mhm.
if you're on the East Coast or in Europe, you can also do your sperm freeze with us in New York if you prefer to
Yeah.
do that. And we have some checks and balances that make that about a wash financially.
Mhm.
Women would need to, if they're using their own eggs, they will need to go to San Diego in the beginning to create embryos. But then later, you're not going back to your clinic after your,
Mhm.
your transfer, assuming everything goes well. You're going to be managing everything remotely. And a huge part of this process is sort of trusting that things can be managed remotely. Even if
Mhm.
your surrogate, lives in the same state as your clinic later down the line, she's probably still going to do things like monitor locally
Mhm.
while taking meds.
Mhm.
So
Exactly.
the standards for this process are not even really that things need to be local. And I think, again, it's just going back to having a small pool of clinics that you want to look into,
Mhm.
making sure you're comparing apples to apples, and then
Right.
saying, okay, who do I feel the most comfortable with? Because my time at the clinic is going to be very limited.
Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. I think this is 100% true. And I think over time, we're definitely seeing more and more intended parents who are just choosing the clinic they think is the right fit for them, instead of just choosing one that's close to them for the convenience.
Yeah.
Right. I actually just, as you spoke, I actually got a live question from one of our viewers asking how long they would have to stay, near the clinic if they were going through cycle. So that's actually one of the questions that we have prepared on our
Good.
sheet. So
Yeah.
it's one of the most popular questions for sure. So why don't we jump on that question right now? If say for a female intended parent using her own eggs,
Yeah.
if she were to work with a clinic that's not local to her, how
Mhm.
many times does she need to travel there for the egg retrieval cycle, and how long does she need to stay?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways you can do this really, and some of it probably depends on how far you live from the clinic.
Okay.
International parents sometimes may come and just stay for a few weeks
Hmm.
and get everything done and go home and they were there one time. If they
Right.
live closer, I mean, all women are going to need to come one time to be screened. We want to
Hmm.
make sure that we have done the screening and we agree that everything looks safe, medically
Yep.
safe to proceed. Um,
Yep.
the screening appointment, it's just a couple days. That's not a big deal. Then you've got to do things like contracts and escrows, and it's going to take, at least a couple weeks to get all these things done. So
Hmm.
you probably, if you live close enough, would go home after you do
Hmm.
screening. And then
Okay.
once these pieces of the puzzle are connected and you're set up and ready to start your cycle, then you would come back. And then at
Hmm.
that point, there's really a couple ways to go. You could, again, plan to stay. You could start your
Hmm.
medications and just stay through basically the 2 weeks that you're going to
Right.
do this and
Hmm.
do your retrieval. And then you could go home and technically you don't need to come back. You might want to come back for transfer, but you don't have to.
Right.
Um,
Right.
or some parents do plan to just stay. They will say
Hmm.
like, okay, let's just stay all the way through.
Got
The
it.
other option, and this is not an always, but sometimes if there's extenuating circumstances, someone lives really far away and has a good
Hmm.
clinic near them where they could do some monitoring, we may send them home after the screening, have
Okay.
them start their monitoring at home
Right.
for the first
Okay.
and then they will
Mm.
just come back for the second week leading up to the retrieval and stay for a
I
week.
see. I see. Got it. Got it. So basically, yeah, it depends on the situation. It depends on the scenario. But generally speaking, twice. The first time is the medical screening, and then the second time is here for the transfer.
Yep.
But the length of the stay for the transfer visit kind of depends, and maybe there are things to work, to work around.
Well, the
Is that
retrieval.
for the retrieval time? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, yeah,
Retrieval.
retrieval.
Yeah,
For the,
retrieval.
yeah,
Okay.
it depends a little bit on your circumstances, but it's
Mhm.
probably you would come 2 or 3 times and then you're done. And with
Right.
them,
Right.
it's
Okay.
one time. It's just one time.
Yep. Okay. Sounds good. And for intended parents who are providing sperm, as far as I know, it's a lot easier. Can
A
you
lot
walk us through
easier.
like how long that visit would be?
So short. Men just have it easier when it comes to
I know,
fertility
right?
every way. So yeah, it's really short. You would come in. You can decide to do it East Coast or West Coast.
Mhm,
Either way, it's a couple of hours. You're going to come
okay.
in and you're going to do the FDA testing, the test the
Mhm,
FDA requires for surrogates.
mhm,
You're
mhm,
going to do that on the same day that you do your sperm donation. So that's a
mhm.
physical, some paperwork, some blood work, a urine
Right,
test, and then
right.
you'll do your sperm donation. So 2, 3 hours and you're probably out of there and you don't ever have to come back unless you want to.
I see. Okay. Well, that's very, very convenient. And what about for surrogates? What does the process look like for surrogates who don't live near the fertility center?
Yes. So most surrogates are not going to live near the fertility center. I mean,
Mhm,
that's usually the long and short of it. And if they do, you're probably going to wait longer and pay more because we're in California. California surrogates typically make more than all other surrogates, and it is not necessary. But any surrogate, no matter where they live, is really just going to come twice. If someone
mhm,
lived in San Diego, I suppose they could do their monitoring, but that we don't
mhm.
see that very often. Um,
Exactly.
Even if a surrogate lives in California, the odds are it's not within super easy driving distance to come for every blood test. So
Yeah.
surrogates typically only come to the clinic 2 times. They're going to
Mhm,
come one time to screen, and then they will go home and they will come back to transfer.
mhm,
Everything else where they're taking their medications and they're doing the testing to make sure their medications are working correctly, they'll be done
mhm,
locally. We'll set it up with a local clinic, and then your
mhm,
SDFC doctor would get the reports of that testing and would make any adjustments they need to adjust. But either
mhm.
way, they're just coming twice. And that is
Okay. Got it. Got it. And what about for international intended parents? Like, is there anything San Diego Fertility Center does to help them minimize the number of visits or minimum the length of stay in the United States?
Yeah, so we actually have a whole team of outreach coordinators that work specifically with parents from certain countries and help them
Mhm.
navigate the sort of logistics that are required from whatever
Right.
country they happen to be coming from, because different
Right.
things are done different ways and different legalities and all of these things. So
Hmm.
you would be working with the coordinator for that country. And
Hmm.
a lot of times they will do like their sperm freeze, their egg retrieval, even sometimes they're making embryos overseas and just shipping everything to us to have
Hmm.
their actual transfer done here, their embryo creation and transfer done here.
Right.
But we do go to pretty great lengths to make sure that all of our international parents are matched up with the coordinator for that country that knows
Hmm.
the ins and outs of working with that country and makes everything as simple as possible. But there's a
Okay.
lot more shipping of sperm, eggs, and embryos from overseas than there is domestically.
Got it. Got it. Okay. All right. Sounds good. And I would take a second just to talking about like, in terms of choosing a surrogacy agency, is it necessary for intended parents to work with an agency that's close to them? And the short answer is completely not. Like, absolutely not. It's definitely not necessary for an intended parent to choose an agency that's close to them because technically you would never need to go to the surrogacy agency because everything would be done remotely and virtually. And I understand if some parents want to visit the agency and talk to their team in person, that is totally, it's totally understandable. And but it's just not necessary because all of the services the agency provides could be done remotely because we will help the parents find a surrogate who, you know, will probably not live super close to the intended parents either. And if you're only looking at agencies in your area, obviously you're limiting your options and you're just not looking at, you're basically just skipping all of the agencies out there that provide great services and that are perfectly qualified to help you. And I always encourage intended parents to do the research and don't let the location limit your options. And same comes to clinics, because just because this clinic is the closest to you, it doesn't mean that is your best option. And communication is obviously very, very important for both agencies and clinics, just because once you're in the process, you need to be updated by the clinic, by the agency. And once your surrogate is pregnant, there will be a lot of communication going on between all parties, and you want to make sure the agency is there to help facilitate everything, to help make sure you are receiving all of the updates from your surrogate, especially after she's pregnant and released her own OB. And also just the experience that I talked about earlier as well, and the team. I think it makes such a difference if you can tell the team just truly cares, and the team has some sort of experience with just personal experience with surrogacy or IVF, that kind of stuff. Just because I feel like when I talk to someone, it's not that difficult to see whether or not they understand what I'm going through. Like, I think that's a really important factor for intended parents choosing a surrogacy agency as well. Because if you're just talking to a team who talks to you about this process as if I have nothing to do with it, versus a team of people who went through this process themselves, either they're former surrogates, former intended parents, or former egg donors, and they just know what you're going through. Kind of because this process is not easy. It's not a simple process. It's long and complicated. Sometimes it's full of emotional ups and downs, and we just want to make sure we're always there for you. And that is my opinion for parents who are deciding whether they should choose an agency that's close to them for the convenience, so they can stop by the office, versus an agency that might be far from them. And also these days, I would say, especially at FSC, we have employees kind of all over the country. I myself, I'm also on the East Coast. I'm based in Boston. So if there's, we have any viewers in the Northeast, feel free to reach out to me or Ruth, and we'll be more than happy to meet you guys in person.
Yeah.
As I spoke, I actually did see another live question from a viewer. They're wondering, so Ruth, earlier you mentioned sperm donor, or when the intended parent going through the sperm freezing and stuff, you called it sperm donor or sperm donation. Can you elaborate a little bit more why it's called sperm donation?
For an intended parent using their own sperm?
Yeah.
Oh, it's considered a directed donor because we know that this sperm is being provided for the purpose of infertility, and it's going to be used with a surrogate. So it's a directed donor for this process. So I think more than anything, it's just terminology. We could also say your sperm sample, your sperm deposit. But technically, you're a directed donor. So that word donation is used a lot.
Got it.
It's nothing technical.
Right. Got it. So because the recipient of the embryos, which are made of sperm and eggs, is going to be a surrogate, which is not the parent themselves. So that's why the sperm provider and egg provider are considered donors, or direct donors.
Because and this is where you hear that third party term all the time. The third party is the egg donor and the surrogate. The parent is not one of the third parties, but they're still donating the sperm in advance for this process to be transferred to a third party. So it is a directed donor to be used for this process. But we could also call it, your sperm sample, or you're providing your sperm, whatever you want to call it.
Right. Got it. Okay. So for the viewers out there, if you are going through, or if you're planning on going through surrogacy and you come across the term sperm donor or egg donor, while you're providing your own eggs or sperm, don't freak out. You're not actually donating your eggs or sperm to someone else's. You're still, creating your own embryos and making your own babies, but it's just a terminology, because your sperm or your eggs will be going into a third person, which is your surrogate. That's why it's called a donation.
Exactly.
Okay, sounds good. I think we covered a lot of information today, and but lastly, do you have any general advice or comments for intended parents who are considering building their family through third-party reproduction? Just what are your advice to them?
Yeah, I think, to put it in kind of blunt terms that you could gentle down, I think really hope for the best and prepare for the worst mentally makes a lot of sense, because you are almost for sure not going to have the worst luck that anyone has ever had, but somebody does. And it's luck to that person. It's nothing
Yep.
that necessarily went wrong with their surrogate, with their donor, their egg donor, with their clinic, with their agency. Someone out there has bad luck. So
Yeah.
based on the fact that, say, SDFC has this amazing 80%, chance that you're going to have an established pregnancy with a first single embryo transfer, everyone hears the 80% and forgets about the 20%. 20% is not nothing. It's 1 in 5. It's
Right.
something. So you have to keep these things in mind, that even though you're anticipating and hoping that you're going to have a successful first transfer, if you don't, that's not abnormal. It doesn't mean something's wrong with your surrogate. The biggest piece of advice I could give medically is listen to your doctor. If you've picked a clinic that you trust and hold in high regard, if your doctor tells you this was bad luck, your surrogate is perfectly fine, beautiful uterus, everything looks great, we should transfer again, that's going to be your best bet. Because I've seen people in the past that have demanded a new surrogate that just feel like, no, like that we're not comfortable now, we want a new surrogate.
Okay.
They get the new surrogate months later after waiting for a surrogate again, because now they're more strict on their parameters. Like maybe they're asking for things that are beyond the normal medical cutoffs at a clinic. And somebody else matches with the original surrogate and has a baby while they're still now in process because they've started over. And keeping that in mind first and foremost is that your doctor has your best interests at heart, and also the clinic's success rates at heart.
Exactly.
We don't want our success rates to be bad. We're not going to tell you to keep going with a surrogate that we don't think is a good surrogate, because we want to be successful too, as much as we also want you to be successful. So trusting your clinic and trusting your doctor is paramount. I think the other thing is, like with me, I tell people there absolutely are no stupid questions, because none of us went to school specifically to know how to do a surrogacy journey. And that's, I just tell people all the time, you will not bother me by reaching out. You're not asking a dumb question. I guarantee you other people have the same question. I still learn things every day, but I'm like, wow, I didn't know that, or some new piece of technology comes out. So never feel like you should hold a question back, because there are absolutely no dumb questions in this process.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, thank you. And as you were giving advice, we actually did get another live question specifically for you, Ruth. And that viewer really wanted to ask you this question. What's your opinion on single embryo transfer versus double embryo transfer?
Okay, so loaded question, because we're one of that still will do a double embryo transfer. Our stance on it is that you're going to be grilled about the additional risks with a double embryo transfer as far as a twin pregnancy is concerned. It is higher risk than a singleton pregnancy, for sure. Transferring 2 embryos, it's not as high of a risk as if you transferred 1 and it split into 2, because they're not sharing a sac and sharing a blood supply. It's 2 sacs and 2 blood supplies. But it's still riskier than a singleton pregnancy. There's a higher risk, certainly, of your surrogate being on bed rest towards the end, because you want that pregnancy to go as long as possible. And the best way to do that is by having her put her feet up and rest. There's a good chance the babies will be born a little bit early. There's just not room in there. And then there's, because of that, a higher chance the babies could end up in the NICU. The question is it a manageable risk? And we do think that it is a manageable risk if all parties are educated completely about what this means. All parties are happily agreeing that this is what they want to do. The surrogate has to be enthusiastically happy about doing this. And the surrogate is going to be held to a stricter standard. Not everyone that could be approved to carry a singleton pregnancy will be approved to do a dual embryo transfer. For instance, it's going to be stricter about the height of the surrogate. Longer torso equals more room. Things like number of C-sections may be lesser. So there's definitely a stricter guideline for a surrogate to carry twins. But my best advice with that is that if you're considering it at all, just do the free consult with the doctor and let the doctor talk you through it, because we will do it, but we just need to make sure everyone completely understands and that your surrogate is specifically screened.
Right. Got it. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for the advice. And I think, well, certainly I learned a lot of things today, and I hope our viewers find it really helpful as well. And to close our webinar today, and I just wanted to say, to all the intended parents out there who are considering building their families through third-party reproduction, just, do your research. And once you think you're ready, just go ahead and take the first step. you will get there. Because sometimes you hear kind of like, stories of intended parents who are having a really difficult time. Just trust your team, and you will get there eventually, because we have such advanced technology these days, and we have teams of people who are extremely experienced, have basically pretty much seen all possibilities, all kinds of situations. And even if things don't happen perfectly smoothly, just know that you will become parents one day, and just stay hopeful, and you got it.
It's exactly
All right. Thank you so much, Ruth, again for joining us today. And thank you, everyone, for watching our webinar today. And if you do have any questions or if you have any questions you didn't get to ask today, please feel free to reach out. And I'm Chris Gao from Family Source Consultants, and Ruth Ellis from San Diego Fertility Center. And have a good one, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.